before we start the discussion, let's just go through what has happened. Basically, a report has been published by Data and Society, and let me show you a copy of the report itself. This is one of the data maps that they were showing here, but this is a report called Alternative Influence Broadcasting the Reactionary Right on YouTube here by Rebecca Lewis of Data and Society. Now, normally I would not have heard about this report if people did not bring it up, if I didn't start getting emails and messages and DMs and phone calls about it. I would never have heard about it. It's not something that normally attracts me, that kind of a report. I would not have known about it. And it seems to have received some fair amount of traction here. So somebody asked me specifically about potential defamation claims, and I decided I obviously have to read it. And I have to admit, it took me a couple of days to get through the entire report. And a big part of why, and I've read obviously many reports in my life, is that very quickly when you read through it, you realize that the research techniques at best would be called shoddy. It's not a very good report. It deals a lot in conclusions, but provides almost no real information about how this whole report was built up, what information was used. There is a small section that deals with it, and I'll show you in a second, but it's very minimal. If you take what was written as this is how the research was done, basically this was not, you know, conclusion drawn out of fact. These were conclusions covering facts, meaning you start with a conclusion and then you impose it on a set of data rather than the other way around. So it wasn't that interesting to read as a result, because I'm constantly reading it and getting upset. Like, well, this makes absolutely no sense. This is not how you would run a research. I'm not claiming you to be an expert research, but for in good or bad, I've spent a lot of time in academia. I have obviously a bachelor's, I have a master's in international finance and a JD, and I've spent a lot of time writing research. I've done also a very large research project as part of my honors thesis. So at least I'm aware of some of the techniques used, and I've studied statistics and how you would come to some of these decisions. And so as I was trying to come to figure out what's the legal implications of this report, it was difficult for me to get through it, because I was getting irritated of, okay, this is not a real research report. This is just a piece designed to implicate a group of people. And then you start looking at what the group of people are and who they are. This so disparate number of people. It says, okay, none of this makes sense. Nonetheless, when I was approached about it, I was asked for a very specific question related to potential defamation. So I had to go through it in details. And what this report essentially is, it claims that there is this loose network of individuals. It does focus a lot on YouTube, although it claims that some of these individuals really operate outside of YouTube. But this is really a YouTube report, to the extent to which it is a report at all. But the idea that these people operate somehow in some sort of loose network designed to bolster one another and bolster some sort of an extremist ideology through collaboration. Now, there are a lot of problems with that kind of idea. And even if it was absolutely true, the research doesn't bear it. Meaning, let's assume that somebody, even if we go outside of this particular report, somebody has an absolutely correct view of what's happening in the world. Doesn't mean that the research they've done actually leads them to that conclusion. They might understand what's happening, but the research doesn't feed. And what's clear from this, I have no idea at the end of the day whether or not her conclusions are correct. But I can tell you that given the way the report is written, it's in no way leads toward that one conclusion. I've told you before, I have zero interest in politics, social politics, or any of this kind. I know some of the individuals named in this report and how and what they're interested in. Even among the people that actually I do follow out of this report, I tend to follow their stuff that's not very political. For instance, Joe Rogan is on this report, and I don't listen to anything that gets discussed on his show that has to do with politics or social norms, just things that happens to be interesting to me, the people that he interviews. Nonetheless, from what it seems, the author focused on some 65 different social influencers and looked at how they, in her mind, collaborated towards some goal, some extremist goal, and how they bolstered one another and worked toward it. There's a lot of flaws in that kind of research study, if nothing else, because you're focusing on the very people you're trying to actually study. The problem is, if you want to say that these people are somehow different than the rest of the world, you have to do research on everybody, meaning you'd have to collect information on YouTube at large and show maybe how these people somehow operate differently. For instance, if your complaint is that these people are doing something insidious through collaboration, you'd have to show that collaboration is not something that normally happens on YouTube. But in fact, collaboration is a huge part of social media. People do that all the time. They do it among tech. They do that in the travel industry. They do that on makeup channels. So the fact that you can show that there might be some collaboration among a small group of people says absolutely nothing about what they're doing might be unique or different or collusive, because ultimately that is a big part of what social media is about to begin with. So there's just flaws in the way the research was done. Not to mention that she often then creates new definitions for words and terms that are used commonly in social media. The very word collaboration. If you and I are collaborating, we are both working toward a particular end, right? We're going to collaborate on a video. We want to have a certain end goal, and we're working toward it. If I, on the other hand, interviewed you, that would not be a collaboration. It's my work. You know, you're a guest on it. Or if we are having a debate, you can't say that we're collaborating toward a specific end because we are arguing against one another on an issue. But in order to make the point, the author said that collaboration is everything. And as a result, creating this kind of nodal effect, which you can see here, and I'll put it up here so it's clear what we're talking about, created this kind of a nodal effect, which what you're looking at here is how if one individual ever had some sort of collaboration with another, there's a line between them. If on the then that second individual then may have spoken to somebody else, another line. And her point is that through collaboration, you end up with something akin to 6 degrees of separation kind of idea. I speak to you, you speak to somebody else. As a result, I have some sort of a connection to the person that you spoke to, even though I never spoke to them. That's the thesis behind it, that somehow extremist ideology is being propagated through social media because, you know, I might know somebody who knows somebody who might have spoken to a third person. That's the idea behind it. Again, even if there was any validity to that kind of a notion, that would have to be born in the data itself. And if you follow how the data was done, and but probably we shouldn't be going through that too much of that because that's not really getting too much into the legality of it. It was basically focusing on a group of people, looking at the titles of their videos, trying to figure out who they talk to, and then drawing nodal connection between them, assuming that as a result of that, what you're getting is extremist ideology. So it was really more of a way of collecting information based on a group that you already targeted, but none of that data actually shows anything related to how extreme ideology might be propagated. None of that was part of the research. So as a result, in many ways, this is something that should not have been, nobody should give it any real credence to. And yet, the fact is that more and more media outlets have at least commented on this report. More and more, it seems that news organizations, digital magazines have gotten their hands on a report and seem to be referring to it as if it's something that has any validity. If this was brought out of an academic circle, this would never have gone anywhere because you cannot present this kind of research and claim any sort of a validity. This would be a career-destroying kind of report here. but this seems to be propagating in media. So the question is, well, if there's shoddy evidence here, conclusions that are not drawn from evidence, but rather conclusions superimposed on evidence, can that be the basis for potential defamation down the line here? So that's the question posed. And after I made my way through the report, which again took me a few days only because it was just I was getting upset at it as I was reading through it, I came to a couple of conclusions. First of all, what is defamation? Defamation is false statements of fact, right? So we're not talking here about opinion. We're talking about statements of fact that you can verifiably say that they were false. That's broadcast, and broadcasting doesn't have to be anything specific. Anything that's being expressed to somebody other than the person you are lying about is broadcast. So in this case, you publish a paper, it propagates through media. That's sufficient. That causes damage to somebody's reputation, financial well-being. You got to connect those two. The big thing is, well, are there statements of fact, and ultimately, can you prove damages? I was looking through it, and I'm not the biggest expert on all these individuals. Most of those people I've never really listened to, so I can't tell you. Although I do know that they are very disparate in their opinions here. I don't think that for many of these there will be real damage here. I think for many of these people this will be brushed off. They might be upset about it. There might be lies. They might be able to point to things that they don't like. But my gut feeling tells me, and I might be wrong here, that for many of them there will not be huge damages. Partly because some of them are just too big to be damaged by such a report. Joe Rogan is not going to be damaged by this report. He may get upset over it, that he was included in a group and being called an extremist and somehow seem to be collaborating with people towards some nefarious end. But whether or not this will do any damage, probably little to none. And for some people, because of the nature of their work and how their fans react to them, this is not something that's going to be negatively impacted. They'll talk about it and they'll complain about it, but they're not going to suffer any sort of financial harm by it, because the people that follow them understand who they are and what they are, and are not going to be somehow persuaded otherwise. They may not be relying on mainstream kind of advertisement where they are getting money off of sponsors that might react to that. But there are some people that you look through it, and my gut feeling is they will be damaged by it. They are some of the people that make money off of sponsorships, off events that are, I would say, more middle of the road, or simply do not fit into this network whatsoever, for whom, if you put them in this network, they seem as if their body of work would be one big lie, and they can be harmed by it. How much? Unfortunately, you don't know until it happens to see whether or not the world reacts to it. Obviously, my hope is that everybody throws this into the garbage, because it doesn't really have that much validity in it. Again, even if you can prove to me that this is true, doesn't mean that the report has any validity, because you cannot impose a conclusion on top of data without having the data lead you toward that conclusion. Otherwise, this is just complete nonsense, because we all have opinions. In and of themselves, they're not worth anything else. It's when you put it together as a form of report claiming that the data led you there. At that point, it can actually have a real impact here, and that's the big issue. So damages there could be potential damages down the line for a certain subset group within this huge nodal map that was drawn as part of the report. And the conclusion then it comes down to whether or not you can prove that there are false assertions of fact here. And just tell you from some of the discussion, it seems that some of the lines here are at least claimed by some people, that some of these lines that you're seeing between different people are complete fabrications, that some of these people have never met the other person, they've never spoken to them, they barely know who they are, beside the fact that they know that they exist on YouTube or on Instagram or on Twitter. And so there seems to be false indications through the map as to some connection. So there are some, at least, assertions that some of these that some items within the map are false. There are a lot in the report itself. Also has lots of conclusions. A lot of those conclusions, unfortunately, are more opinion in nature, right? If you say that a specific individual believes in something, in many ways, even though it might be completely false, it's more of an opinion, right? If you tell me that this individual who is normally left-leaning, you tell me is more right-leaning, well, that could be an opinion, even if it's completely false. My opinion could be utterly false. I might not believe what the guy's saying. He might be telling me that he's a supporter of this particular person on the left, but I believe that he's lying. So normally those kind of conclusory statements are absolutely our opinion. It's very difficult to sue for defamation on it. The report also includes some very, very specific statements. I'm going to guess at some of those statements, let's say things that people were interviewed or things that people said on their videos, that they're likely true. I can't vouch for any specific statement. Were they taken out of context? Were they quoted properly? Did they provide the full sentence, the full paragraph? There's no way for me to know. It's up to the individuals. Whether or not you can connect a specific lie about a specific statement to a specific damage, that becomes a little more problematic. But I think that the bulk of the potential falsehood that could be traced ultimately to damages, at least in my opinion, based on the reading here, is not based on any specific sentence, because it seems to me that the heart of the problem here, at least from the way it's presented, that the report is shoddy. There is no real research involved here. That a group, from what I read, is being targeted and conclusions superimposed on them. At best, she did some research as to who spoke to who and who may have interviewed who and who debated who and who argued with who, but in no way actually then connected it to any of the conclusions. The problem then being, if you do bad work as a part of the research, is that sufficient to get you to be, well, then it's a complete lie? Is it just shoddy work because you don't know how to do research? Or is shoddy work just becomes, a cover for falsehood, because then you take individuals that otherwise are in no way connected to your little network of nodal discussions, and because there is no valid work, you're just superimposing conclusion that they then can cause damages. They're not opinions, they're just, falsehood as to the basis of your research. You are falsifying the validity of the research that then can lead to people getting dragged in and potentially damaged through their career and their reputation and stuff like that. I think that's a big part of my suspicion of what's happening here, that there is bad work, and whether or not you can prove that the work itself, because you then take people and throw them into this amalgamated analysis and you're superimposing conclusions without any evidence, you effectively are then factually lying about people and their and what they believe and what they're trying to accomplish. In my opinion, that's where you would go. That's the heart of the defamation case here. An individual might be able to show false statements, again, that I had never had a connection. That's a specific one here. The question whether or not you can tie that one lie to damages, that's more difficult. But if you can show that there is just terrible research that effectively is lied on because none of the conclusions were drawn out of the facts shown, you can actually more easily connect damages to the report itself. Now you have to understand that even if you get there, the legal standard for defamation when it comes to these individuals is far higher than for most of us, right? Because my suspicion, don't really know, that why these people were targeted has less to do with their political affiliation, because I already know that a lot of these people don't fall into a specific category. There is an interest in somehow tying them together to the alt-right, but many of these people are in no way connected whatsoever. Some of these people have a completely leftist social opinions and much more liberal opinions. But the problem is that once you target people that have some social following, and there's no real way to indicate how much social following is sufficient, at that point you're a public figure, and the standard for when it comes to defamation is not just negligence, mainly, well, I made a mistake when it comes to my research and I made a problem. As a result, I can be sued for defamation. No. For most of us, that will be enough. But for people that have reached some success on social media, they'll be considered public officials, public personas, and as a result, the standard for them would be actual malice or complete disregard. Mainly, you would have to prove that the lies or the falsehood were actually intentional. The author either knew of those falsehoods or just complete disregard, mainly didn't care whether there's truth at all about it, just accumulated, threw it all into it. Truth or not did not matter. That level. And that just makes, obviously, defamation a little more difficult. It's part of the price you pay for fame and success, that your ability to sue for defamation just becomes harder. So celebrities, politicians find it a little harder to sue for defamation. Not saying that it's not there, not saying that it didn't happen, just saying that the standards becomes higher. But to me, it seems that there's definitely a case to develop here, especially if you get a few people together here to start discussing whether or not pointing to certain falsehood here. I think a big part of it to whether or not you can actually prove it would happen in the discovery phase here, because the first thing you do after filing a lawsuit is, let's get some discovery here. Let's see actually get all the data, all the information, how this was done. At that point, you clearly could see whether or not there was any data supporting any of these conclusions or these were just made up. And that's what this goes back to the prior viewer's comment about where was it? About Majid Nawaz versus the SPLC, where it never had to get to even a lawsuit. Why? Because what normally happens is you start making accusation in order to clean house. The attorneys start looking. They realize that sometimes there is no research. It's sometimes their reporters are liars, or sometimes they just make things up. They might have a great idea but didn't do any of the work, and this gets settled. How many times have you heard of reporters from different organizations getting kicked out and an admission by the newspaper or the media company that they fabricated something? I think that's where you're going with this. You're looking to either start a potential case that would force an internal investigation within Society and Data. I believe that's the name of the organization, right? From Data and Society. Or you're looking to start a lawsuit that will get you into the discovery point where you can then get access to all the information and see exactly what happened. But that's the heart of the story. I think that the strongest claim for defamation is based on, if you just read it, about how shoddy the work is and how these individuals were targeted. Mainly the entire research had to do with them, not about a broad target of YouTubers and social influencers that led her to say these people are doing something different than them. And also seems to be that all the data collected and whatever analysis was done, if anything, had to do with how these people potentially collaborate based on a redefinition of what the word collaboration is, but talks, debates, arguments even among people, without any sort of analysis, without any data showing that none was actually provided here. That would be the strongest evidence here that that sort of nodal connection that she makes somehow leads to collaborative extremism of the audience. None of that seems to be drawn from the data itself. Anyway, let me know your thought on it. Let's go to the comment to see what's going on. Before I do, thank you so much for Gravedigger. If you say John UKIP today, will this stream be flagged for offensive content? Well, we'll see what happens now. Frank and Berger, if SO gets banned from the Linux mailing list because of the new code of conduct, can they revoke the license for the code they contributed to the kernel? And if so, what then? I'm researching it. I would take a look. Over time, I've read just about every open source contract out there that's being used. I cannot speak specifically about this one, so I don't want to tell you whether or not the conclusion will be there, but we'll do a video on it. Basically, for those who don't know, code of conduct being passed among Linux developers, and that seems to allow the organization to punish and exclude certain developers based on some social conduct. Some people say, well, we're going to withdraw, and claiming they can then actually revoke their license that allows other people to use their code, which will have great implications for anybody relying on that code or any other product that actually incorporates that code. And there's an argument whether or not they can do it, whether or not it's important, they should be doing it, and obviously gets into a whole larger discussion of codes of conduct and how they're developed and whether they should be superimposed on people. But like I said, I haven't read that license agreement in detail enough to provide you that answer. Cons Clanseth, is fuzzy science a legal term? It's not a legal term, but it has been used in cases many, many times because it has a certain cachet, obviously, here. Normally, if you were to write this kind of report, the bulk of this report would be about how you collected data. You would actually include all the data collections, let's say some sort of diagramical information that shows all the different nodal connections between the different individuals. But more than that, you would have to lay the basis for why these people were included in this report. Because why not others? If you look at some of the name, like Sam Harris, you know, somebody that I enjoy listening to a great deal. I definitely do not listen to any sort of political discussion that he may have. This doesn't interest me, but the bulk of his stuff does interest me a great deal. He's very, very smart. If the argument is that everybody that he speaks to is somehow now involved in this right-wing extremism and the desire to push that agenda on the population, you can imagine how many people would be included in this. I mean, there's no logical way for this research to have happened without actually showing why these people specifically are included versus everybody else. Because if that's the argument, then CNN has collaborated with murderers and rapists and terrorists and hackers, right? If every time you interview somebody, you're a collaborator, if every time you debate somebody, you are then somehow adopting their point of view and actually expressing that, then this report should have included virtually every single individual on the face of the earth. Because if you wanted to make those kind of connection, we're all at somehow connection, you know, connected through 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of stuff. So it's like I said, my hope, if anything here, that this report doesn't do any real damage, because everybody will negate its value, because you can't read it and say, I think this was a valid research. Even if you agree with the conclusion, whether or not about the idea at large that people are collaborating towards some extremist agenda, or even if you agree that these particular individuals are, that does not give any credibility to the report. It can be an opinion piece, you know, then I'd have no real issue with it. You know, it's an opinion piece about how these individuals or social media helps grow extremism. You know, that's what people want to write. That's their opinion. I couldn't care less. But when it's masked as valid research without any real valid underpinning, without really any sort of exposure of the data set and how it was collected and why people were targeted, and showing some of the raw data about nodal connections and how those connections then leads to specific points of view, and then what the viewers see, all of that, none of that was connected. All that was ever shown was, if I'm focused on these people and I can show some discussions among them, that means that my conclusion is somehow correct. And that's not the way research is done.
When the lights are out and you stumble in the dark, you kept pushing on, but then you went too far. When your ship is sailed and all your dreams are lost. Everything is wrong, you feel like it's your fault.